are joined by Peter Barron, who's founder and principal at Carabiner Communications. Peter has nearly 3 decades of experience in marketing with a proven track record of success that spans several verticals, from wireless communications to enterprise technology, medical devices, e-learning, and more. So we're really fortunate to have Peter to host this Ask Me Anything and really share some of his decades of knowledge and experience with startup companies that are looking to develop their own marketing communication strategy. So with that, Peter, I'll turn it over to you and let you take it.
Great, thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for joining. Let me share my screen here. Hopefully y'all can see that. Can you?
We can see that, yep.
Good, okay, all right. So just a little bit about me. As you mentioned, been doing marketing and PR for a long time, and consider myself actually kind of a tech nerd. I started in Manhattan on Madison Avenue doing work for people like Coca-Cola, but soon found that if there wasn't some technology attached to it, I wasn't really going to be that interested. So I've been doing software and hardware for a long time. I'm in the Atlanta area, and we have a firm of 29 people and 25 clients. Some of them are tech startups that are venture funded, some of them funded out of revenues. And then the majority are sort of fast growth technology companies. There's a little mention there of some healthcare companies too. We love healthcare tech as well. We've got a track record, I'm going a little faster here, of 500 plus product launches over the years. Includes with people like Apple and IBM, but also with building tech companies too. So Trimble was a client of ours for a number of years, and SketchUp used to be a Google company, and they were of course purchased by Trimble. Done a good bit of work with them too, and so deep tech expertise. We find that we spend a lot of time, especially with entrepreneurs and fairly early stage companies, doing a lot of messaging and positioning work. So lead generation campaigns, engaging with social media content, creative content, PR, SEO, and I'm happy to talk about any of these when we get started here in a few minutes. Media buying and planning and website development, event management, and brand and messaging development. Just a little bit about our experience in the space. It's much broader than what you see here, but you'll see companies that have been involved. Some of them small and others, pretty well established, and been providing technology to the built tech arena. We've generated a good bit of news coverage for our clients over time. If you found that to be a challenge, and if that's something that you feel would add to your story and your credibility, we bring a good bit of experience there. We've also done a number of websites for our clients, and we do a good bit of print collateral development. Yes, things still are printed once in a while, or of course they're downloadable. And that design work and the messaging work, we do a good bit of that too. And that's probably all you need to know about Carabiner and who we are and what our capabilities are. So broad base of capabilities, really focused on technology companies. So let me unshare. So we can see one another again. Okay, great. I'm back with you.
Yep. So I've got a question for you. So for a startup that typically, your founder, maybe you have a couple of co-founders that wear all of the hats, right? When it comes time that you've landed some of your first customers and you're starting to grow as a company, and you haven't quite nailed down what that communication strategy is or the brand messaging strategy, what are some of the first steps that a growing startup company can take to, I guess, better articulate what their brand messaging is and what their vision is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thanks, Ian. One of the exercises that we take our clients through, it involves a little bit of a perspective change. For instance, we did a long meeting last week with a client that's in the data science arena, and they were super good at talking about themselves in great depth, and their information was good and well and refined, but it was all told from their perspective. There wasn't a lot of, well, what does our customer want? What kinds of pains are they feeling? And so that's one of the first things that we try to do, is come in with a little bit of an orientation switch. And one way to do that, and I have a sort of fun whiteboard exercise where I'll go up and I will draw kind of a stick man on the board and say, well, who are you trying to sell to? And then we label that person. It may be, a CFO, it might be a VP of tech, maybe somebody in marketing, and it may be that there's more than one persona that they're going to sell to. And then I indicate that all these people, in order to do their jobs, are absorbing information from lots of different sources. Some of those sources come to them and they allow it in. Others, they're going out and they're finding information, and sometimes they're talking to their peers. But in any event, it all is in service of what they're trying to accomplish and what are their pains. And so the next part of the exercise is to sort of list, well, where does it hurt them? What are they really trying to accomplish? And we find that that's not always super easy, that often our clients don't have a deep understanding of their customer. They're great at understanding what their solution can do, but maybe not as close to their customer and the pains that they're trying to solve. In cases where they do have a good understanding, it's easy to go to the next step, and that's alignment, right? So let's try and align what you're saying about yourself with the needs of the prospect. And then after that, it's really sort of wordsmithing, how do we present this information in a way that it's going to be absorbed quickly and easily and accepted? Is it going to be coming to them from a source that they believe? So that's kind of my early advice is, if you're a C-level person in a startup, you're wearing a lot of hats, it's easy to move fast. But if you can take a little bit of time, it's well worth it. I think, in a couple of hours, you can go through an exercise like that, and it sort of retargets your messaging.
What about with regard to kind of budgets? How do you make a decision on how much budget to allocate towards your marketing and communications when, priorities may be on cost of goods sold or other aspects of the business? Again, at an early stage growth company, how do you kind of decide how much to allocate for the budget?
Yeah, good question. So normally with a sort of bigger company, you can take a percentage of your revenue and put it into your marketing budget. But if you're prior to that, you just kind of have to look and see what's available. For instance, if you want to be found and you don't have anybody in your team that's really good at search engine optimization, or you don't have people that can run a sort of AdWords paid search campaign, and you don't have somebody on your team. So if LinkedIn is an important platform for you, you don't have anybody that can help you with sort of promoted or LinkedIn ad campaigns, you can get help to do that almost by the hour. You can find a consultant to do that. Yes, we do it, and we'll do it on a project basis. But there are a good number of people out there that understand that and would be willing to come and have a good look at what you're doing and set up things that need to be set up so you can then run it. That's kind of more along the digital marketing lines where you might be out of pocket for a spend. But for the other things, let's say when it comes down to content creation, if one of your team members is a pretty decent writer and you've gone through the process of figuring out what to say that's going to appeal to your prospects, you can certainly produce some content and then maybe bring in your designer to prepare that content in a few different forms. One of which might be an infographic, which takes complex information and packages it up in a way that's pretty easy to absorb. And you're going to need a number of content assets, of course, especially if you're running an email marketing campaign to generate leads. Those campaigns really move forward when assets are available either for download or to look at or to educate. If you find yourself thinking that, well, we really need a video, That's a tough one. Good videos can be expensive. You sort of start at the 10 grand range and can go from there. Some are coming in at sort of the 5K range. Be careful when you're looking at that. If you've got somebody that's providing video, have a look at their video reel and see if their ability and their style matches your budget. But I would definitely shop that around. So I haven't really given you a great answer to your budget other than to say, yeah, there are some things you can do with sweat equity. There's other things that are more sort of out of pocket marketing costs. And I think one of the biggest mistakes you see is you run an AdWord campaign, but you don't spend enough. You're basically donating money to Google. And so get some help with that, some good qualified help to come in and do an audit of what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and I assume that that's a service that Carabiner can provide as well, yes?
Yeah, we're certainly not alone in doing that, but we're happy to do that.
When you come in to do an audit, what are kind of the key things that you're looking for with regard to your meta tags and your keywords? How do you assess, if it's effective or not, and then help with kind of delivering a strategy going forward when it comes to SEO?
Yeah, and so you're talking to a guy here that's more on the content side than the tech side. So I would definitely bring one of my tech guys in that would have that discussion in greater depth. It is a more technical side of things. And the good part of that is you can look to see if things are set up right. There's a lot of money being spent on doing this, and it ought to be set up to do things the right way. One of the things though that I would get involved in early is kind of a messaging audit. If you have competition, and often you do, if it's not another company, sometimes it's the prospect that you have that's doing what you do in a slightly different way or a more manual way. But you can go in and have a look at what your competition's saying, and then that will help you in terms of differentiation. I definitely have a dig into alignment. What are you currently saying on your website, and does any of that match with your customer pain points? That kind of analysis, so the messaging analysis and audit is really important. Sometimes that isn't always reflected on your website. You may have it in a sales presentation, or maybe you're out there pitching for money. You've got a nice, deep, complex deck that you're showing to investors, but that may not all be in the right places either.
You talked a little bit about kind of the marketing mix, and once the company's messaging has been clearly defined, articulated, what are you seeing as some of the most impactful medium for communicating that message, whether it be LinkedIn, Facebook, other social media? We talked about email marketing, obviously having a clean website that clearly articulates that message. So on the content side, again, as an early stage growth company, where would you prioritize your budget and efforts with regard to the types of content you're creating?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question too. I can think of 4 answers to that. I want to make sure I don't bumble over it, but I certainly think definitely from a lead generation standpoint, you're not going to exist very long unless you're selling product. So that really needs to be job number 1. Email marketing is still very effective. That's really list-based though. You certainly don't want to buy a list and then have your account suspended for sending spam. So there are some cautions when it comes to email campaigns. So we get a little counsel on that. We're happy to provide it, but there are, if you don't have a list, ways of developing a list eventually to where you've got a pretty good customer database. And then, designing your campaign and your cadence. While not rocket science, there's some art to it, and that needs to be done well. So I think that should be a high priority. I think it goes without saying, your website really needs the right kind of investment. And especially when you're doing email campaigns, because obviously you need to be able to track people. A lot of times your email campaign is going to be pushing somebody to your website. Often that's where the link is broken. you don't really have it connected to your marketing automation system, whether it's somebody like Salesforce, Pardot, Marketo, or some of the more affordable products like ActiveCampaign or SharpSpring, where you're capturing leads as they come through your website and as you're going through your email campaign. I will say this, and this is the one thing I'm seeing more and more requests for, and that's PR. So even when I say it, people are like, well, what's that? If you've been marketing product for the last 4 or 5 years, you probably haven't done any PR, because it was the least trackable marketing component. And the thought was, why should I put all this effort into trying to convince a magazine writer or a journalist to talk about me when they're probably not going to get it right, and they may even turn me down, and I don't even know if anybody's going to read it. That was kind of where we got with PR. And so if you could control your message, through AdWords and search and email campaigns and your website and events, that was kind of where all the marketing budget went. Digital marketing became more kind of a math equation. And so everybody saw kind of hockey stick growth, especially with companies that did that early. But now it's the point where everybody's doing digital marketing, which means that everybody's sick of getting emails. Everybody's over getting text messages, and nobody wants to answer the phone, right? So we've all been successful at making our prospect hide. And so what do they do now? Now they're going for trusted sources. So that word is really has become important. So now as they cast around for trusted sources of information, all of a sudden, trade publications, magazines, industry analyst reports, that's kind of become the gold standard again. So they're not being paid to say good things. They're saying stuff because they've considered it. And so those old problems with, how do I get them to write about me? How do I get them to say the right things? Those are still here, but we're finding now that you need to make the effort. So if you've got somebody to help you with your PR, and we do a good bit of that, and they can help you package up your story and take it to a journalist, and they can then write an article, or if you can prepare, we call it a pitch. It's nothing to do with baseball, but we sort of package up an idea, and it may be something that highlights your product in action, right? A case study. Those are really, really important. Magazines love to do that. They like to cover product in action. And so a campaign that includes getting those placed is important. Then that content, if it's not read by the readers, it's something that you can then take as a piece of content and use it on your website, in your email campaign, in your social. It becomes a very credible asset for you that you can use in a lot of different ways. So we're seeing the resurgence of that. More and more companies are wanting it. And I sometimes look at it like vitamins for your digital marketing campaign. It makes them work better.
Along these lines of public relations, what can you say about the importance of earned media? I think you've kind of already touched on this a little bit. Earned media, and then social proof as well, using social proof to create more credibility around your product or service.
Yeah, I mean, if you could only do earned media, it would probably be the best. You're not going to get the reach or the frequency out of earned, but it's considered to be more credible, right? If somebody else is saying good things about you, it's more believable. The best kind of earned media would, of course, be one of their peers saying, I am using this software, over coffee or lunch sometime. You should really talk to these people. Other forms of earned media are variations of that. So yeah, extremely important. Definitely put it in your mix.
Hey, you brought up another point. How often do you think that growing companies forget to share their big wins, or use, landing a new customer or landing a big project and then using that as your content?
Yeah, it's common to use that kind of content in a sales setting, right? When you're calling on a prospect and you're pitching them. Sales guys are good at that. They'll put it in their deck, but it isn't used as often from a marketing lead generation standpoint. So um, obviously you have to be somewhat careful. Some customers don't want you to step out there with their logo. So within the bounds of your relationship, figure out how you can do that. We have some clients that sell into the security space, IT security. And of course, their customers don't want to be named, so they have to be generic. But it doesn't stop them from doing case studies, which end up being very important. So I definitely endorse that as an approach.
I'm touching back again on the growth of the company and starting to allocate more budget towards marketing. What would you say would be the most important first hire that you should make in your marketing department? Should it be focused more on the content creation, the tech side with SEO, maybe a combination of both, maybe a coordinator role? As you're starting to build your marketing department, what would you think would be the first one or two hires that you should focus on?
Yeah, I would make sure I've got sales support right. How can I make these people that are out there or on the phones effective? And so the skill set you're looking for there is probably the ability to write and design, kind of a Navy SEAL type person. If you don't have a lot of budget, they're probably going to be young, but you may find diamond on their way up. You may not be able to hang on to them, but they'll do some brilliant stuff for them for you for a while. Then your lead generation has to be hot on the tail of that. So you want somebody that understands how to run an email marketing campaign, and that's going to be able to get into your digital marketing systems and kind of knit everything together within the bounds of your capabilities and your budget. I think you can outsource some of your writing and your PR. If you get big, then of course you can put those seats on your team. I think the problem with insourcing your PR is a lot of it's based on relationships. Media relations is, right? So if I'm pitching a publication, for instance, on behalf of 4 or 5 clients or 10, I'm going to be more effective than if I work at a company and I'm just pitching my company all the time. I don't have as much to take to those writers that they're going to be interested in. So to me, it makes a lot of sense to kind of outsource that part.
As your sales force grows and the marketing department grows, what are some guidelines you could suggest on ensuring that there's a strong link between the two? I know a lot of times folks can confuse sales and marketing and sometimes think they're the same thing, but what are some strong ways to ensure that those teams are connected in a way that can both, provide value to each other?
Yeah, so I should ask, because I want to say something I might get into trouble for. Are there any VPs of marketing on the call?
I know we have a startup founder and CEO, and then we had another just join. I don't believe so though.
Okay, good.
You're free.
All right, so I'm free to say what I want. So I think the easiest way to crack that nut would be to put it all under a sales leader. So chief revenue officer, or they used to call it sales and marketing, right? The VP of sales and marketing. So we knew whenever we called on a company or we had a client where that was the title, that they didn't really know that much about marketing. They were really salespeople that had responsibility for some marketing functions to report to them. That ensured that marketing was in line and completely supportive of sales. I think where you start to pull that apart is when you've got a CMO and a chief revenue officer, right? They both are peers. The one is pretty sophisticated with the approach to marketing and lead gen. And then the sales person is like, these leads you're sending me are no good. There's no quality there. Your campaign's terrible. That's kind of where it all starts to get a little bit tense. But that situation is replicated in so many places, and that's kind of why it's legendary that there's tension between the two departments. So I think up until a certain point, you can eliminate that by having more of a sales focus with marketing reporting up. As long as your eyes are open to taking some counsel from the marketing experts, and you're not just shutting it down.
You mentioned some marketing software that's useful, like Marketo, and or some even sales support like Salesforce, Salesloft, Pardot. Are there any other tools out there that any startup should consider utilizing to help support not just the marketing side but also sales?
There are a ton of tools.
Or even let me
yeah.
take a step back. Instead of asking about specific tools, maybe specific types of tools. So CRM, et cetera. What are some, I guess, categories of tools that teams should consider?
Yeah. So Salesforce bought Pardot. And so now when you say Salesforce, it's not just CRM, it's also marketing automation. And but those are discrete functions with some apps. And so I think most companies are going to have a CRM first, which is great because that kind of is the special place for your database. But then having a marketing automation system to plug into that is a good first next step. I was actually just looking at some pricing. There was a competitive table that somebody showed me today with marketing automation player vendors on there. So the lower end tool on that was sort of around $5,000 a year, which is like a Sharp Spring. And then when you get up to a Marketo or Pardot, you're in the sort of 10 to 15 grand a year range. And that's a lot of money for a small company. So what you find is actually the lowest one on the list was Active Campaign at about $2,000. So we're starting to hear a lot more about Active Campaign, which I think is a pretty good tool. MailChimp, a lot of people are using that. It's on the low end, highly capable. You certainly run your surveys through something like SurveyMonkey. A lot of people are integrated with Calendly or some other sort of calendaring product. But some sort of closed loop that's going to treat your database really well, that it lets you capture leads and then follow up on them. And then if a lead doesn't go all the way to warm and it goes off on the side somewhere, it's for you to be able to keep track of that and reactivate it at some point. Your CRM isn't really going to be able to do a great job of that, but some of these other systems will do a very good job with it. So yeah, before you completely cover yourself up with lots of with a very deep MarTech stack, those are probably the places where you start.
I want to allow other attendees on the call to ask questions. I don't want to take all the questions myself. Of course, I have more, but I've enabled talking for everyone. So if you do have a question, just unmute your mic. You can share your camera and feel free to jump in and ask Peter a question about your company or any sort of sales and marketing questions that you may have. So I'll leave it there and allow, looks like Kurt's unmuted. So go ahead, Kurt.
Hey, Peter. How you doing? It's Kurt, founder
Kurt.
of Edifice. Yeah, I just have questions more around on the first part, what you were talking about. More on the early side of this startup of understanding the pains and problems of that customer that you see a lot of startups kind of, I got a solution, but I don't understand the customer in depth enough to communicate with them properly and draw leads, that type of thing. And on that, what are like a lot of, I guess, exercises that you do with companies going through that? Are there key questions you have them ask the customer that they may have missed because they built all these, this product or this tool or some sort of MVP already, and they're getting their customer acquainted with it? Is there anything you see them missing a lot, or they just miss questions, or is there something about customers where they maybe don't want to be as open as maybe necessary to understand their deeper problems, right? Well, the problem is around budgeting or hiring or this, that, but the deeper problem is, my bonus and what I want to do with that bonus, where is the line, I guess, where, you're trying to, trying to figure out like what works best or what resonates best at that kind of discovery phase.
Yeah, that's really a good question. Thank you. I think, yes, we do have a set of questions. Some of them you could easily find on the internet if you're going to do, say, a buyer persona exercise and you're going to run it. There's some good content. You can just search and it'll give you the questions. And I think too, beyond that, we get back to this personal or the self-interest that a lot of your prospects have, which pertains to their budget and their compensation. And if I bring in a sort of new technology, and it doesn't work, is that going to blow back up on me? I really want that promotion. I think, dealing with that issue is interesting. So you've probably read Crossing the Chasm or familiar with it by Jeffrey Moore. What you find with those innovator companies, you may get a younger executive who's kind of willing to take a bet. And it's a smaller proportion of the companies, but those are the ones that if you can get in and they're willing to kind of buy your value proposition, they're risking their career a little bit, they're swinging for the fences. Those are really cool early customers. Their persona may not reflect who you're going to be marketing to down the line when your revenues actually start to pick up. But approaching them with messages that will appeal to them, and the book deals with that, right? Your messaging needs to change as you sort of go beyond that sort of early innovator into the folks that need a little bit more proof and want to see that other people are taking risks before they do. One of the challenges is to sort of get enough knowledge for a small company. Big companies with lots of customers can spend lots of money and do surveys, and then they can be analytical about the data. Small companies really can't do that. So a lot of it's seat of the pants or gut. And hopefully when you've been doing a product market fit work with your development, you learn some things. Sadly, sometimes a product gets developed because an innovator thinks of a great idea. They feel they've got a good comprehension of the problem that they're solving. But when they actually get the product done and start to try and sell it, that fit isn't quite where it needs to be. And so a pivot is in order. So some of that work earlier on would be obviously a great payoff, not only for development, but for your messaging, your positioning too. So just even a minimal number of interviews with people who could potentially be customers is gold dust. And, I found over the years that people that you want to sell to, if you go to them and indicate sort of cap in hand that you're developing a solution that's early, it's not available yet, all of a sudden they're not under threat, right? So you're not asking for money, but you'd love their input. You can find some people that'll spend the time with you and give you the insight that you need. That compiled with assumptions that you have from your knowledge in the industry are going to, I think, put you on the right path in terms of what you should say, when you should say it, and how you should tune your message. Good question.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We'll keep the floor open. So if anyone else has a question, feel free to unmute yourself. Everyone should have talking permissions.
Yeah, happy to answer anything.
I did have one question that was typed in.
Yeah.
For startups, should the content that you're creating be focused around the brand or around the product offering itself?
Yeah. Okay. So I would probably say for startups, more around the product offering. That's probably the quickest path to solving the pain. Brand is intended to create a feeling that you can trust the company. You're going to find a lot of marketers that say that the lift that you get from your branding is everything. I think that's after you've got a product that people want to buy. So after a while, when you've got a recognizable brand, your brand is probably going to come first. But for a startup, you really have to get people excited about the solution that you have, the tool, the product that's going to go in and make a big difference for them. The name of your company, you know, how your logo looks, your colors. You can ruin it for yourself by really messing that up, but I don't know that it's going to win you the deal.
You had a client that has had a particular marketing strategy in place. Maybe it's been focused around their brand, or they've pivoted the product or service and they've had to rehash that messaging and I guess maybe replace or eliminate some of the older non-relevant messaging they've had in the past. Have you experienced a client like that where they've had to pivot, you know, their entire message strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely done that a number of times. Not just for small companies. We were doing a big project for Motorola for quite a few years, and they had millions in their marketing budget, not to mention their tech budget, but it was for technology that would go into flat screen TVs. And they did a massive pivot at tremendous cost. So it happens on the top end of the scale as well as on the lower end. One of the things to consider when you're doing messaging, and I use the oil tanker as an analogy. So none of us have driven an oil tanker. We may not have actually seen one in person, but just kind of use your imagination to go with this analogy. Imagine you've loaded up this oil tanker, you know, with product, and you know where you want to take it. So you have to obviously apply energy and a considerable amount to get this thing going. It's heavy. It doesn't really want to start going. But once you get it going and it's up to speed, you realize, well, wait a minute, I've got to make sure I have this pointed in the right direction because it doesn't turn real easy. Messaging and branding is a lot like that. You spend a lot of time creating and so selling people on the notion of what you have and who you are. And you have to be pretty confident that if you want to make a 90-degree turn, you're going to lose a lot of people. They're going to keep on thinking that you are who you said you were rather than who you are today. That's going to take a little bit of time. And I understand, you know, there are times that you need to do that, but I think you need to sort of swallow the pill and understand not everybody's going to go with you on the turn and remember who you are. The other way to do that too is to remember oil tankers do turn, but slowly. And so you may take a pivot suggests that, you know, it's a 90-degree or a 180 type quick turn. But if you have the luxury of being able to plan and take a more gentle turn, then the chances are, and this obviously only applies if you want to take some of the folks who knew you when, if you want to take some of them with you on that journey, turn it a little more slowly, plan for that, and make that turn.
See Grant Anderson join. Grant, do you have any questions for us, for Peter?
Hey, Grant.
Don't be shy, right? We're here to help out and answer any sort of pain points you might be going through. I'll wait to see if he unmutes himself. I'll ask this follow-up question. Yeah. What are some important metrics that you should be looking at to measure ROI and see if your messaging strategy is effective or not?
Yeah, so there's a number that you can develop. One is message penetration. So if you've agreed on what it is that you want to say, then you need to try and look to see if that messaging is showing up where it needs to. Of course, you've got control over your paid sources, but your earned sources, that's going to be a little more problematic, but definitely something you can control if you do it well. Other data points, of course, is if you're trying to drive traffic through some of your campaigns, make sure that you're measuring those data points as well. If you've got content that you've got out there to be downloaded, what a great metric that is. Sometimes you're going to be capturing names when you put that content, other times not. There's so many great breadcrumbs that you can look at right now that are going to prove the ROI.
Any other key considerations that we haven't discussed yet or haven't talked about with regard to growing? Most of the companies in our network are seed stage or kind of approaching Series A. So any other key consideration that we might not have touched on yet?
Yeah, I think seed stage companies, and I think maybe most of the companies that are in that place in their history are trying to raise money in a number of different ways, right? Friends and family, or from an angel or a VC, or they're bootstrapping and they're trying to sell some product to generate revenue. Every one of those people that you talk to is potentially somebody that can help bring you a customer. The most important customer you can get probably is a referral. So don't be afraid to ask. And certainly you can waste your time talking to too many of the wrong people. But you can also find the more broadly you're understood by influential people with connections, the greater opportunity you'll have to be able to get the kind of referrals that are going to make a difference. Not just for funding, but maybe to open doors for you in deals. The other community I would make sure that you don't forget is sort of the professional advisor community. So as I've worked at least in Atlanta for a long time, I know that there are certain firms that provide professional services that have clients that could really benefit from what you do. So you could be strategic in looking at some of those when you're networking, and see if there might be some synergy. Maybe they would like to be able to introduce one of their own clients to something really cool and new. Perhaps not something that you would think about all the time, but I think a nice little secret sauce type tip.
Well, if we don't have any other questions, I do just want to remind everyone that Peter is a member of the Shadow community, so you can reach out to him directly there via DM if that's okay, Peter.
Yeah.
And then if it's okay, I could share your contact information if anyone did want to dive any deeper or learn more about the services that Carabiner can provide, maybe with supporting in some of the areas that we've talked about. I'm sure that Peter and his team would be happy to learn a little bit more about your goals and strategies and help you along the way.
Absolutely. Would love to do that. And it's always easy when we can be more specific than talking in generalities, but appreciate you coming today, and thanks for having me on.
Thanks so much, Peter. All right. Well, we'll send the recording out to the attendees and we'll follow up. Thank you so much, Peter, for joining, and everyone have a great week.
Thanks. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.